Hello. Hi. This is Dr. Jane Galloway welcoming you to the Gateways, the Wisdom of 12-Step Spirituality. This is such a wonderful opportunity to record this on sacredstoriesmedia.com. And I'll tell you, you would be remiss to not visit the site either on iTunes or at sacredstoriesmedia.com to access some of the other wonderful podcasts that people are doing, and also to discover the new online magazine called The Owl. And The Owl is a compilation of writings about humor, spiritual matters, etc., in sync with the philosophy of Sacred Stories Publishing. So I recommend you check all that out, and I encourage you to check out iTunes, Sacred Stories Media on iTunes, okay? So today we're looking at Gateway 4. Before we get into the specifics of that, I really wanted to talk a little bit about the process of looking at this developmental model through the lens of these gateways. The subtitle of my book is Dynamic Practices That Work. And I have begun to realize that I think some people think the practices we're talking, I'm talking about when I refer to that, have to do with the various spiritual mind, body, spirit tools I give in the back of the book, along with each step and the essence of each step. Those are fantastic for practicing each developmental level, but really, what the dynamic practices that work are the 12 steps. That is what this whole book is about. It's about the 12 steps as spiritual path. And these are the deeper realizations and principles I have discovered after working these steps for many years, over 3 decades. So I hope that is clarifying for people. So I'm looking at the essence of each step, and then each one of the spiritual practices that I correlate with each developmental level can be practiced, can be mixed and matched, and I give you a bento box of spiritual tools, too, in the back of the book. So, okay, so we are at the really critical moment here of step 4, or gateway 4. A lot of people really avoid doing this part of the process. People get afraid, and being around the program, the recovery program of AA for many years, what I've discovered is that many people get so worried about looking into some of the behavior that they have, some of the behaviors they've done while they were actively addicted. People come into the program with tremendous shame, confusion, self-loathing, etc. And while the impulse is to want to just apologize to everybody in the world on day one, it's really advised in the program not to do that. There are steps later, and we'll get to those, where making formal amends to people we've harmed is the order of the day. But it's really advised that we do the inner work first to get to know ourselves. And sometimes we don't owe somebody an amends, or we think we might, because we just come in guilt-ridden and shame-filled and traumatized and, very frankly, ill, in body, mind, and spirit. And so it's advised that we give ourselves some time to do this inner work. So this gateway correlates with step 4, and here's why people are afraid of it. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. That's what the 4th step is. So I've watched people relapse before they've done the 4th step once, twice, a few times, just saying, I don't want to look at that stuff, or I don't think I can look at that stuff, etc. But I want to explain in this time that we're together today what a gift this formula is for going deeper. It really is, it's the opening into true freedom. So I really encourage everybody who's interested in working these steps as a spiritual process. Whether you're formally addicted to something, we live in a pretty addicted society, so I bet you can find something you're addicted to. But even if you can't, really, if you want to work these steps as a spiritual process of awakening, this step is fantastic. Now, I'll tell you what it takes. It takes rigorous honesty. And this is why, in the beginning of the book, I really talk about the fact that I have wondered if these steps are a little too rigorous for anybody who's not completely desperate, because most of us crawl into the rooms of whatever our particular recovery program is, and we're willing to do anything to feel better, to get better, to fix our lives. And so we're willing to do this intense inner work. But I'm telling you, the rewards for really going deeper are amazing, and they open up deep well springs within us of spiritual resource. So, okay? So I recommend it. What I will say is that there is a big difference between knowing the steps and working the steps. Just think about attending a class and being handed a syllabus on the first day. You're not taking the class by just reading the syllabus, right? And neither are you working the steps by hearing them talked about or reading them or whatever, and not doing the work. And this is really especially true of step 4. The difference between the quality of recovery in people who do and do not do step 4 is dramatic. This point in the process of going inward represents a major, major turning point. So congratulations if you've come this far. I've called it in the book a fulcrum, and it's so funny how words come to us. I thought, that's the perfect word for this. What does it exactly mean? So I looked it up. And it really means the point on which a lever rests or is supported and on which it pivots. And so the whole success of these steps really pivots upon being willing to do this step and doing this inner work. So here's what happens. There's a great formula for doing this work. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a grid. And it says, I resent, and it's funny because they fill in a few names so that you can kind of get the drift of it. I totally didn't understand it when I first came in. But I resent Mrs. Jones, it said. And why? Because she, didn't speak kindly to me numerous times. And what does it affect? It affects my self-esteem. It affects my personal relationships, et cetera, et cetera. Then the last column is the key here. I mean, they're all important. But the last column says what I did. What I did. So we keep going on the list, but we make a list of resentments. Very interestingly, somebody helped me early on in this process by telling me, you know what, I was advised by a very wise person that I should have at least 200 names on my list. He said, that seemed ridiculous to me. But he said, it really wasn't too hard to get those names. So I recommend that to you. He did recommend it to me, and honestly, that's about how many I had. So I think what we're doing is we're really looking at patterns in ourselves, and we're looking at relational patterns and the way we respond to emotional situations in our lives. So it's worth doing the deep work. This gateway section really is composed of steps 4, 5, 6, 7, and they're the whole inner journey. So we've created a foundation with the first 3 steps, right? With admitting we're powerless, coming to believe a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, and then coming into the moment of decision by making a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of that higher power. And as I referred to last week, that's referred to sometimes as a 3-legged stool. You can really support a developmental path on those 3 basic admissions of powerlessness. But pretty soon it becomes necessary to start going inside and doing deeper work. I always find it fascinating to learn how these things originated. This wasn't some outer idea somebody had about, okay, now you need to look at yourself. Really, what happened was these original people who found themselves getting sober for the first time in centuries, there was a method that was working, were asked after the first maybe 100 people had utilized this process that was working for them. How does it work? And so they actually had to go back over it and say, okay, well, we have to admit we're powerless. We have to turn our will and our lives over. We have to believe that there's something greater than us. And then what happened was everybody was so relieved in the beginning. I'm not just plagued by this. It seems I'm losing the desire to drink, etc. But then pretty soon, things started coming up, all these ideas and things and memories of things and behaviors. And it became obvious that unless there was some formal process of really doing inner work, people weren't going to get better. And a lot of times people would relapse. So this formula for doing this inner work, for doing this fearless and searching inventory, moral inventory, it says. We know so much more about medical science now that, yes, people who are addicts often do things that are not in sync with their own moral bottom line. But addiction is not a moral issue. And this is a very important switch now that we understand the effect of trauma on the brain, and now that we understand the psychosocial patterning that creates circumstances, as we call them in the program, the ism of alcoholism, so that people can be not addicts but have all of the behaviors of the addict. So now that we understand much, much more about this, what we have to understand is that these are not, we're not bad people getting good. We're really sick people getting well. And I don't say this in terms of necessarily this disease idea, but, there's a lot of evidence for the fact that brain trauma and early trauma in the first 5 years causes the conditions that people feel they need to self-medicate, okay? But anyway, so it's necessary to do this inner work. Steps 4, 5, 6, 7 look at clearing, cleansing, and releasing. And what a powerful process that is. Here, I'm going to tell you what the basic questions are. Who do I resent? Why do I resent them? What does it affect? And what do I do to perpetuate the pattern? What the step 4 process helps us do is to look at how we become off base and how we have by trying to deal with resentments, loss, disappointments from a place of fear with really limited resources and without the help of a higher power. No one shoots herself or himself in the foot over and over again the way addicts repeatedly do if they feel happy and healthy and loved and secure. So this step is really about looking at our relationships and the way we have managed our insecurities. Some people, again, back to this brain research, people have a very reactive brain, overactive, reactive, trauma-based connectedness from one event to another, kind of along the lines of PTSD. So, as I said, step 4 is really created out of need. The really amazing thing is, for many, many years, before we had brain scans and before we understood a lot about the physiology of alcoholism or addiction of any kind, because the same centers light up in the brain around most addictions. Before we understood this, psychologist Carl Jung was one who's quoted quite a lot in the AA literature, said to someone who was a chronic relapser, he said, I have never seen anyone manage to really maintain long-term recovery unless they have a profound spiritual experience on top of all this medical work. This particular gentleman they were talking about in the story in the big book was from a wealthy family. He had been flown to Switzerland to do a year of very high-end treatment and, eating healthy food in the mountains of Switzerland, et cetera, but really getting a lot of psychiatric help and, becoming completely abstinent. And in the airport on the way back to the United States, he got drunk. And he was devastated. He didn't understand why he did this. And that is when Carl Jung rang in and said, look, I have never seen anybody manage this real definite switch in their character without a deep spiritual experience. Okay, so now we know, of course, that yoga, meditation, can change the whole chemistry of the brain, because we've been able to watch people through biofeedback, etc., while they were meditating, while they were doing yoga. I'm not sure if people have been hooked up while doing yoga, but I'm sure they have, to measure brain waves. Also, there's a marvelous technique called somatic experiencing, and I really recommend that anybody who's feeling the effects of trauma look into it. It's a wonderful technique, not hands-on at all, and you don't go into the trauma without a great guide. But what that process is about is really about unbundling events in the brain. And it's amazing because, say something very traumatic happened early in your life, and you have a strong reaction to that. So much so that anything else that happens in your life that even begins to feel a little bit like it, you immediately react. And your brain, and this is so interesting because it's your brain that's bundling these two events together. So your brain bundles it with that earlier event and tells you fight or flight, fight or flight. And, often the stress of that kind of heavy adrenaline blast creates people rushing for whatever it is that calms them down, and often that's the addictive process, the particular one they use. In my case it was alcohol, but anyway, so we're now learning about all of this. But the funny thing is, or fascinating thing, is that there are also numerous mental illnesses which have been very resistant to treatment. One of them, antisocial personality disorder. Another one is a psychopathology. And the literature shows us that the 12-step process actually has been quite successful in healing people with these diagnoses. And so people haven't really understood over the years why. But it's pretty cool. If it's not broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. So people continue to work this. But all too often, I fear moralizing, as opposed to understanding that there's a brain alteration going on here. And when the brain is altered, then we're able to access our deeper resiliencies and really pull upon our deeper strengths. And this is exciting because we have a lot of really crazy stuff in our personalities and in our behavior when we've grown up in an addicted family. But we also have amazing resiliency, sense of humor, and ability to see the big picture, a very well-developed rebound mechanism, a lot of resiliencies that many other people don't have. So there are both strengths and weaknesses that come from growing up in this kind of environment. But one of the great things about doing some of the basic work of the steps is that we calm ourselves down and we're able to create some space inside our psyches and our hearts for the work of pulling forth our deeper resiliencies to begin. And this is exciting because strength-based psychology, strength-based social work was really brought forth in the 1970s, not that long ago. And now it's being used much, much more in the treatment of addiction. So it's pretty exciting work. So this idea of making a searching and fearless moral inventory is followed immediately by step 5, which is telling, admitted to ourselves, to God, ourselves, and another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. Now, I believe God is in us. And so when we've admitted it to ourselves, we've pretty much admitted it to God. But the importance of telling another human being, both of these steps really require somebody helping us on the journey. So, you know, in the programs they call them a sponsor, but you can find a friend, a therapist, a clergy person. Some people hire someone to go through this process with them. Because sometimes this stuff is pretty deep stuff, but when it's processed through, there's a spaciousness and an ability to really grow into the fullness of who we really, really are. That's pretty exciting. One of the metaphysical theories I love is called the vacuum theory of prosperity. And this is something I learned about via Emmett Fox, who wrote Power Through Constructive Thinking and the Sermon on the Mount, both of which were foundational kind of, you know, understandings for the spiritual part of the 12-step programs. But the vacuum theory of prosperity states that nature can't tolerate a vacuum, but we have to create the vacuum in order to have any room for all of this up-leveled experience to really rush into our lives. So this idea is really very practical, too, because we really look at all this stuff and we write it down. There's an amazing power to this process, I assure you. And then we share it with another person and we really let it go. And then in steps 6 and 7, so these all kind of go together, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 6 and 7, we really ask God of our understanding to remove these character behaviors that have really plagued us and others. And then we have a lot of open space there to really begin to pull forth the highest and the best in us. So this is a critical step, really, this step 4. Just to tell you, from the gateways, this is correlated with the heart chakra, and so it's right at the chest area. The color green is very much correlated with this. So sometimes I wish I had known this when I was doing these steps for the first time. I developed it over time, but to have, you know, green, have something green in the room with you, and to be playing music that, or a singing bowl that focuses on the musical notes of F and F sharp, can really get you into a frame of mind that will be very advantageous for bringing forth what you need to bring forth for this. And this focuses on the thymus, and boy, a lot of people have trouble with that gland. So, and again, as I said, it's the heart chakra. So I'm going to tell you now the ritual that I suggest in the book, but this is a wonderful ritual I love. I love the process of feng shui. Feng shui was developed in ancient China, and it actually is an art of placement. And, you know, many people, when they're looking for a house from the Chinese culture, will sometimes reject the house because the feng shui isn't appropriate, meaning it's not facing the right direction, the front door isn't facing this particular way. Originally, the translation of what it means is wind and water. And so feng shui is this wonderful art of, first of all, decluttering, and we have to keep decluttering. That's what the 4th step is, too. It's a big declutter to begin with, and kind of learning the inner terrain of our journey for the first time. And we keep repeating it through the process of working these steps over the years. But so this is the first big declutter. So feng shui is big on getting rid of clutter and then on placement. So you look at, you know, this corner of the room is advantageous for personal relationships. That corner of the room is advantageous for money and prosperity, etc. So it's really an elaborate and very interesting science. I'll tell you, I had a great experience when I was really applying feng shui with a vengeance when I started learning about it. And I did our entire house. I moved everything around, and I could really feel, you know, the chi energy is the life force. And it's it's moving in us all the time. And that's the whole idea of the Chinese meridian system, which I talk about in the books too, is to really look at how the qi moves through our bodies to keep us disease-free, etc., or to heal something that's gotten out of balance. So anyway, I was doing this feng shui all over my house and moving this and moving that, and we had a full-length mirror in the bedroom that was very solidly affixed to the wall. And in the middle of doing this work, that mirror literally popped off the wall. There was no question in my mind that it had to do with the energy that was moving in our house. And from that moment, I have had great respect for the power of this art of placement. So what I'm going to suggest as the ritual for this fourth step, as you're doing this inner work, is to choose one place to declutter and to organize. You can do a drawer. I mean, just one drawer, or a closet or the trunk of your car. It's also interesting in some feng shui literature, it talks about the fact that the state of your car really mirrors the state of your mind. So if you have clutter places and drawers that are kind of all full of a lot of junk, that's mirroring some process inside of you. So as we're clearing out here, as we're really taking inventory, it's a great idea to begin to practice this art of feng shui. So the ritual for this is to take one area in your life and really declutter it, move it around so that it's much more tranquil, and maybe look up some feng shui. There's a thing called a bagua, and you can find those in a metaphysical bookstore or pull it up online. It looks like a hexagonal type figure, and what you can do is place that over any room or over your whole house, and you will really see there how to go, or over the drawer. If you're clearing out a drawer, you can put the bagua over the drawer, and then it'll show you what direction to place at the north, the south, the east, the west, etc. And then begin the work of alignment, okay? So I really think this is a great corollary with the fourth step. Again, the fourth step, inventory. You can really think about it this way. If you have a house or a store, you need to know what's in there, right? Especially if you're planning to sell it. Well, if you have a store and you need to know what else you need to buy, and you need to take a look and see if anything's spoiled and you need to get rid of it, you have to take inventory. And we really need to take continual inventory of our own inner situation. So that's what this is all about. It becomes a very organic process that, as I said earlier, goes on for a lifetime. So this is the very beginning of this process. I would say have the courage to throw away stuff, papers and mementos that really, see how it feels. See if it's charged with a positive energy, or maybe it's a memento that always makes you feel a little pang of, I wish I had, not gone there, or I wish. Get rid of it. You don't need to have it. It's an energy. It's an energy in your environment that you don't need. Anyway, any article that is no longer useful and simply ties you to an earlier place, you don't need. So have the courage to let it go, okay? And as with all of the rituals we talk about in the gateways, the finale of this is to bless the process, say thank you, as you begin to feel the renewed harmony of restored balance coming into your experience. So remember, nature cannot tolerate a vacuum, so you're creating it, right? Even describing this to you, I can feel a sense of freedom. And I think you will, as you work through this fourth gateway, this make a searching and fearless inventory of our innermost self. Who do you resent? Why do you resent them? what could you do to change your way of reacting to that situation so that perhaps you won't be repeating that circumstance over and over again? These are the big questions. Okay, my friends, remember iTunes, sacredstoriesmedia.com. Check out the OWL, the wonderful online journal, and I'll see you next time. Peace and blessings.